It's time to read ghost stories. Real, true paranormal tales with Kitton. Let's go.
You may have seen my boyfriend's story, perhaps, about the mushroom tunnels. I've heard of this story. It's actually going to be on the next one. I've heard it's a very good story. But I have my own unique story. It all started when I was about 9 years old. At the time, I attended a small Christian school with fewer than 100 students across 10-year levels. For our annual school camp, years 4 to 6 went to Berry Sport and Recreation Centre for 2 nights. I was excited but nervous. This was 4 hours from my home, and I'd never been away from Mum without an older relative before. Thankfully, my sister was also attending. When we arrived and unpacked, I felt an unfamiliar sensation in my chest. After lunch, we socialized with students from other places. That evening, after eating dinner and night games, we returned to our cabins. We were more secluded than the other students' accommodations. All the girls in my cabin talked about how that place felt eerie. When the lights went out, I saw a tall shadow standing in the hallway. Terrified, I moved to another girl's bunk in the next section, and eventually I fell asleep, until I awoke to hear a woman's voice calling for Max and Luke, reassuring them that it was safe to come home. I barely slept after that. The next night, we went to our cabin to tidy it before heading to the gym for night games. When we returned, everything was trashed, items thrown around, lights on, nothing as we left it. Suddenly, the screams ring out. "It's a demon, demon!" followed by crying and screaming. Teachers rushed to console us, but no one slept through that night. On the bus ride home, I was filled with fear and curiosity. What was it that we had all encountered? Even weeks later after this, I felt uneasy. Then, small things started happening at home. A door rattling with no draft. Footsteps when no one was awake. Soon it escalated. My family, believers and skeptics alike, witnessed unexplainable events. We heard children running up and down the stairs, and twice a clock jumped off the wall at my mother. My guitar strummed by itself, and the worst part, whatever it was, hyper-focused on me. My bedroom was downstairs near the front door. I heard tapping on my windows, scratching on the walls, footsteps on the gravel outside, where no one could have been. Banging on the front door would wake me in the middle of the night, but sleep paralysis, that was the worst. I woke between 3 and 4 a.m. every night, unable to move, often feeling a presence sitting on my bed. One morning, I found my door unlocked and wide open, even though I'd never touched it. At 11 we moved. Everything seemed fine at first. But our new home, strange things continued to happen. My sister's bathroom was connected to my room. I would see one of them enter but never leave. I heard the shower run but no one was there. When I asked, they said that they hadn't even been in the room. After moving again, all activity finally stopped. Years later, curiosity led me to research Berry Sport and Recreation. What I found was shocking. It had once been a home for misbehaving boys, where they had sometimes been hurt even to death, and my cabin, that had been the room where it occurred in. Others who visited reported similar terrifying ghostly experiences, and I still wonder why I formed an attachment and what it wanted from me. But it explains my lifelong fascination with the paranormal. Am I crazy? I live in Appalachia, deep Appalachia. My daily routine is wake up, make breakfast, go chop trees for lumber and such, and then make lunch, and do whatever else I needed to do until work. One night, I was just doing the same old, when it started getting to be nighttime. I was about to go in, when suddenly everything went quiet. No more crickets, No more birds. Nothing. And then, I still don't know why, I ran back to the cabin so fast, just feeling like something was chasing me. Kind of like when you turn off the lights as a kid and you try to run away from it. When I got inside, I locked my doors, and I kept hearing whistling for about 5 minutes, and then the crickets came back. This has been happening every other night, and I'm starting to contemplate moving back to perhaps a more populated place. Can anyone help me figure out what the hell is happening? The whisper through my night shift. This is a simple one, but I feel the need to record it. It's been a while since I got a good scare during a shift. It was around midnight when I decided to do a round. If you read my stories before, you will know the drill. The school where I work, most of my shifts requires that the lights stay off throughout the night. So I try to do my rounds in the dark and as silently as possible. God, that sounds terrifying. For me, that's the best way to quickly identify if something is wrong, and lo and behold, something was. I was entering the largest room in the school, which reminds me of those used for dance classes. Wooden floors, a very wide space. I walked to the other end of the room, which is a dead end except for some bathrooms. Moving swiftly and staying close to the wall on my right, I passed by the female bathroom door. Suddenly, I heard a mix of a whisper, a moan, and a scream right in my ear. A shiver ran down my spine. Reluctantly, I checked it out. But there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I went back to the security room and texted my buddy, who had worked the previous day, to ask if anything unusual had happened during his rounds. I didn't tell him what I had experienced beforehand, but, interestingly enough, he said that he had heard a mix of a whisper and a scream when passing by the female bathroom door on the first floor. Keep in mind, the room I was in was on the second floor. Honestly, I have no explanation for this, and I wonder if anyone in this world does. Let me know what you guys think, and thanks for reading if you made it this far. A man in a safety vest flagged us down and jumped in. This one sounds less ghostly and more actual terrifying experience, but we'll roll with it. My mum and I were on a road trip. I was about 9 at the time. The man was wearing a safety vest on the side of a highway, but he was waving his hands as if he was trying to warn us of danger ahead. So my mum pulled over. Without hesitation, he jumped in the back seat. Well, I would lose my mind at that point. I remember him talking about things to me. He talked a lot about nurses and psych wards. He said that he was in the military. He had to hitchhike for base training. Nothing he said made any sense to us. But my mum stayed calm. And then she says that I made myself very small. I remember he kept trying to talk to me, but my mum made it seem he was more interested in his conversation to keep his attention away. She was speeding, and he kept pointing that out. I later learned that she was trying to get pulled over. That's actually very smart. And I think that he knew that too. It started to rain pretty hard, so my mum told him that she was going to pull over and let him out at the overpass so he could stay dry. He argued with her for a little bit, but eventually listened and got out. Good. When I was older, my mother told me how scared she truly was during that experience. I think we got very lucky when he decided to get out of the car that day when he did. A creepy, true Thanksgiving story. This is a story told to me by my roommate. It happened 3 years ago in 2022. It was a week of Thanksgiving, and my daughter's boyfriend had invited me over to his family's house in Connecticut to spend Thanksgiving there. There wasn't much space in the house, so me and my daughters had to stay in the basement. The only people who lived in the house, beside my daughter's boyfriend, were his grandmother, his sister, and her husband. A few more family members were supposed to be staying over as well, but since we came late that night, I didn't get to meet any of them. We stayed the first night in a house. It was finally in the morning of Thanksgiving. I normally wake up pretty early, so I was up by 7 a.m. I was the only one awake in the house. I went upstairs to the kitchen and sat on a high chair. I sat for a bit just drinking some coffee and relaxing before my day began. As I was drinking my coffee, I saw a boy coming down the stairs. He was in his pajamas and came downstairs to the fridge to get something out of it to drink. I smiled at him and watched him go back up the stairs. I remember thinking how adorable he was. Well, later that day, everyone got ready and went into the kitchen and living room as we began our Thanksgiving celebration. Everyone was together, having a great time, and that's when I decided to ask out loud, "Where's the cute boy that I saw early this morning coming down the stairs?" I was instantly pulled aside by the grandmother. She looked at me in shock and said, "Shh, careful my daughter doesn't hear you." Her son had apparently died in front of this very house a few years ago. She totally saw the ghost of a kid. I 100% believe that. My heart instantly dropped. I couldn't believe what I just heard. After hearing that, I couldn't help but have a weird feeling for the rest of the time I was in that house. Later that night, my daughter and her boyfriend went upstairs to get some yogurt from the fridge. She specifically remembered grabbing a strawberry yogurt and putting back a banana yogurt she had grabbed. As they headed back downstairs to the basement, their hearts dropped as they noticed that the banana yogurt was placed on their bed. We felt super uneasy after this. Thankfully, we ended up going home the very next day. But I'll never forget how crazy those 2 days over Thanksgiving were. Hopefully, we won't have to go back anytime soon. Here's a strange thing that happened to me a few years ago. It happened about 6 years ago. We all live in a neighborhood where all of us, our family, our relatives, have houses right next to one another. One evening, I was standing outside my house with my cousin. She was about to walk back home. It's right across from mine, like about a 2-minute walk. While we were still talking, we saw another one of our cousins walking from her house towards the house of her cousin who was with me. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was one of our other relatives who lives in a different city. We both clearly saw her and assumed she'd come to visit without telling anyone. I even thought about getting ready and heading over to hang out with them both. After a few minutes later, my cousin, who had just arrived home, called me, completely freaked out. She said, "Our cousin is here, but she's alone. The other girl that you saw with her, she's not even in town." We were both completely shocked. When our family asked us about it, we both described the same girl, same clothes, same face, everything. But my cousin who saw her up close confirmed she was definitely alone. To this day, we still have no idea who or what we actually saw. Michigan State Wharton Center is haunted. Hello, I work for the University of Michigan State as an IPF custodial worker. I am here to share my personal experiences with the Michigan State Wharton Center. Keep in mind, I am new here and new to this job, recently being hired on the 27th of January. It was a normal shift, getting used to the unfamiliar building that day, the 29th of January. I was tasked with cleaning and restocking the bathrooms on the first floor. As I am heading back to grab more supplies from a nearby closet, I hear some woman in my ear say, "Hey!" I turn around to see the back half of a woman entering the women's bathroom. I am concerned that it is nearing 3 in the morning and there should be no one in this building except the authorized staff. I enter the bathroom to confront the woman, but She was nowhere to be seen. That ghost gave you the slip. Another experience which happened early February. Me and my co-workers were sitting in the break room when all of a sudden a voice of a male asked what we were doing. Yet again, there should be no one in the building except for the authorized personnel. It's 2 a.m, and my day shift arrives at 7. We checked the halls. No one was there. And, finally, as I'm writing this happened no less than 3 hours ago. So it's a very fresh ghost story at the time. I'm currently back from my shift, and we are doing a rundown, locking things up and turning off the lights around 5 a.m. There is a ballet practice room on the 2nd floor left to the break room. The lights were on, and it was unlocked. After being locked and the lights turned off no less than an hour ago when we were here, we relocked it, and we turned the lights off to continue with our rundown. It takes around 15 to 20 minutes. We come back and the door is wide open again, despite being locked, and we know that the lights were off, but they are on. I will continue to keep you posted on more strange happenings. My great-grandfather. When I was 22, I spent my last semester of college living with my great-aunt. This was in the early 1990s. I'd gone through a pretty bad breakup the semester before, and she'd offered me a place to stay. She was a spinster. That's not very nice. She was a spinster who lived alone in a house that was originally my great-grandparents'. My great-grandmother passed away when I was an infant, but my great-grandfather died when I was 14, so I remembered him quite well. I was given my great-grandparents' bedroom to stay in. One morning, I woke up quite early. It was just breaking dawn. My great-grandfather's apparition was in the doorway. He looked as he did when I was still a young teen. He always wore a charcoal grey sweater over his work shirt and slacks. I was not alarmed or scared. It was quite peaceful, actually, calming. This was not the only experience I have had. I'm now in my 50s. This has always stayed with me. I remember telling my great-aunt about it later that day, and she seemed bothered that it never happened to her. Sometimes I find that sometimes the more you want someone who's passed on, who's a loved one, to visit you, it's sometimes less likely to happen. Oddly, it seems to happen to people who are not yearning for it as much. At least I find in the stories I've read that people will show up there. I'm not sure if bothered is quite the right word. I just think she would have liked to have had it happen to her. Exactly. Growing up in a haunted house, part 2. Apart from the story I told in the previous post, there are some other incidents that I would like to share with you guys. Once, 2 of my uncles came to our house, and we told them about the paranormal activities occurring there. They dismissed it, saying it's just our minds playing games on us. They said paranormal things don't exist in our world. We ended the topic and went to our rooms to sleep. The next morning, they came to us saying, "You were right." We were confused and we asked them what had happened. They told us, in the night, both of them experienced that someone was pulling their blankets. First they dismissed it, but it kept happening until the entire blanket was pulled off of them. Once the blanket fell to the ground by itself, they knew something was in the room with them. They didn't want to start anything then, just acknowledged it loudly. "Yes, I admit you exist," they said. And then nothing happened after that. As I mentioned in the past, that we used to hear strange sounds at night. One of the sounds was a sort of gibberish sound, like if you take 2 pieces of paper and rub them together. Apart from this, imagine a sound where you take a pen and forward it through the window railings. This was a common occurrence. Once my father was sleeping, and he was woken up by that gibberish sound I mentioned above. When he opened his eyes for just like 2 to 3 seconds, he saw someone standing beside his bed. He described it being around 3 to 4 feet tall, and its whole face was covered in darkness, like you couldn't make out where the eyes and nose are, just dark being of small height. When he caught a glimpse of it, his first instinct was maybe it's a thief or someone's broken in. He used to keep a object, we'll say, a weapon of protection, beside his pillow, as we lived in a secluded property. He picked it up, and when he saw that being ran towards the door, my father sprinted towards it. All this happened at like 5 or 6 seconds max. The door was 6 to 7 feet away from his bed. When he reached the door, he realized it was closed from the inside. Then, the sleep began to wear off and reality set in. The door was closed from the inside. This wasn't a thief that just disappeared right now. It was something else, something not alive. It's important to mention that we did take the help of a spiritual person. We have a Muslim faith, and just like Christians, we have priests who are often known as alim. This happened because they used to wake my father up exactly 2:40 a.m. every night, either by making sounds, pulling the blanket, or he would wake up and look at the time, and it would always be, without fail, 2:40 a.m. This went on for months, and eventually he grew tired of it all and called in the alim. The alim came and confirmed the house was indeed haunted. He did some spiritual work on the house and told my father that he made an agreement with them. They would not enter the residential property, but they can live in open spaces like the lawn, the pool, or the gardens. Must be nice to be a ghost and have lawn, pool, and gardens. He hung some spiritual elements around the house and then left. They didn't wake my father up at night any time after that day, but they were still present outside. I would be sitting in my room, and I would catch a glimpse of someone's shadow running outside of my window. It was just a small figure, again like 3 to 4 feet. He would run very fast, and then he would vanish. This also happened with 2 of my other family members. These are the incidents I can recall. Guardian, armored, majestic knight by my bed every night. I like the sound of this one. Greetings. I witnessed this unreal and very beautiful, great paranormal experience back in 1988 to 1989. I was 5 years old. My brother was 4, and at first it started with me only. I used to suddenly wake up around midnight, and I clearly saw translucent, majestic knight in shining armor and legendary long sword, wearing his helmet that is similar kinda to a samurai. I didn't even know back then. It was the first encounter, so I was very, very scared and didn't understand. I still don't. Lol. That's how you know they're from that time phrase, lol. This majestic being visited every night and stood to the side of my bed like a guard for quite some time. He was always standing guard beside me. He didn't make any sign or any communication, just standing there looking awfully majestic. I love this. One night, me and my bro woke up and both of us saw him clear as day. I like that the 2 of you saw it, because that's great for any paranormal story, as it's just a better proof of concept. If 2 people see it versus 1, you can rule out things like hallucinations, so I really like that. We are in our 40s and still talk about him clearly. We both remember even the details of his armor, the helmet, the sword, and how tall and great and awesome he looked. But we couldn't see a face, not even his eyes. His helmet looked, I can't seem to put it in words, just great. Like he was very exalted and somehow divine. Absolutely great presence, 10 out of 10, and peaceful vibes. We still remember, he never scared us, never been afraid. On the contrary, it was a very peaceful experience, embedded deeply, with full details in our minds. Clear as day, no doubt about that. I still seem to think deeply about that experience all the time. Kind of relates to, perhaps, the armor of the divine, the helmet of salvation, and a sword of the spirit, offensively and defensively to protect our minds. Perhaps he saved us from some imminent paranormal or demonic attack. He was a divine guardian. I am certain of that. Have you guys ever experienced anything similar? Feel free to share. My grandmother, for as long as I can remember, my mother has always told me that my grandmother was something. I believe it. She always told me that she acted so strange, and when she and my aunts were little. She once told me that when she was pregnant with me, she and one of my aunts, who at the time, my mother was about 29, and my aunt was like 17/18, lived with my grandmother and took care of her, etc. But strange things started happening. My mother told me that one time when she was sleeping, she woke up because she felt a presence. She says she turned around and saw my grandmother standing next to her, staring at her and smiling in a creepy way. Another time, she told me they were eating with my aunt at night and that my grandmother was sleeping. So my aunt went to a bathroom. But to go to a bathroom, he had to go through my grandmother's room. But for this, my aunt went to my mother's. 2 seconds later, my mother heard my aunt calling her, screaming. My mother went to see what was happening and said that my aunt was looking towards my grandmother's room. There are far too many mentions of aunts and grandmothers in the story at once. My mother told me that when she looked up, she saw my grandmother on top of her closet, which was tall enough to climb on it, and even more so for a person at his age, and who was swaying and laughing like crazy. One of those nights, my aunt had to give my grandmother some medicine. My mother was not there, but my aunt told her. He says that when she was about to give her the medicine, my grandmother was laying down and covered up her head. My aunt asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. To the second, she said, "Mum, what's wrong with you?" And then he says that whoever was under the sheet responded with, "I'm not your mum." My aunt got scared. This story is nearly impossible to read, I may add. My aunt got scared and left her there. So my aunt and my mother almost always had similar things happen with my grandmother, but clearly I think that she did black magic, and that explains a lot of things. But she didn't have any illness like schizophrenia or anything like that. I bet everyone would think that. I didn't. He did witchcraft, black magic, pacts, and so on. That's why he always acted like that. Nowadays, she's completely fine. I think so anyway, because I haven't seen her in a long time. How would you know if you haven't seen her in a long time? Because there was a time when I was already present that she returned to that phase. And I can tell you that in another story. Please don't. And despite everything, she is my grandmother, and I love her. But I don't know. What do you think? I think that was a lot of words. The Old Barn. This is a very true story about an old barn. My dad was thinking about buying one time. The location was up in northeastern Montana. The barn had been a part of an old ranch at one time, but the rest of the homestead had been destroyed or otherwise dismantled. So the barn was the only building left standing on a nice flat piece of ground, perfect for renovation or for an indoor workspace, storage of vehicles, gear, etc. So I went up with Dad, and when we went to walk through the place and take a look at the interior, It was immaculate inside. The barn had 4 or 5 center stanchions, about 10 feet apart, down the middle of the barn, from the floor to the roof. The place was quite sturdy. The owner of the land had cleaned this barn up and kept it nice inside for his personal use, and had put down a layer of gravel inside the barn over the original dirt floor in order to keep the dust to a minimum. Dad had brought one of those wind-up cameras from the store where you could wind the wheel and snap like 15 photos or something. I've not heard of those cameras before. And the photos developed at Walmart. So Dad took a bunch of photos of the interior and exterior of the barn, so he could show Mum the building once he'd gotten them developed. He got the photos back from Walmart about a week later, brought them home, and we looked through them as a family around the supper table at night in our kitchen. All the photos were normal, except for one. It was the interior, taken from inside the front door a few paces in. And, in this particular photo, the barn was a complete mess. Nothing like it had been when we were there. Hay was everywhere, falling from the hayloft, and no gravel covering the dirt floor. When we pulled this photo out from the stack, we were kind of confused and thought maybe we'd got someone else's photo in our group photos perhaps. But it was clearly the same barn. The thing that stood out to our family about this photo of the interior of the barn was the first center stanchion. There was there a silhouette of a man with no head and footprints on the dirt floor leading in, but not out of the barn, stopping at that first stanchion. Dad and I went back up to the northeastern Montana later that year, in fall, to hunt grouse. And so we went and spoke to the guy who owned this barn, showed him our photos, and then the one weird photo. When we showed him that photo, his face went pale white, and the look in his eyes was like one I'd never seen. He told us that his grandpa had been murdered there when he was a small kid, but his parents never told him what had happened, and the murder was never solved. Needless to say, Dad never bought that barn, and the owner had it torn down that next year. One of the spookiest things I have ever been a part of in my life. My brief haunted and somewhat funny experience. Been on this subreddit for quite a bit of time now, and I thought that I would share one of my ghost stories. I, at the time 24 male, had just moved into my new house with my wife. Now at this point, I've had a fair amount of paranormal experiences with each place that I've lived, so it wouldn't really shock me if this place was also haunted, or, at this point, if it's probably just me. For some further context as to why the experience spooked me even more, historically speaking, I'm a very deep sleeper. When I was younger, I could sleep through just about anything. Bad storms, and even tornado sirens, that's impressive. Yet, consistently, I can be awakened by the movement, like footsteps. This hasn't changed much since I've gotten older. Lo and behold, the first week of living here, around 2 or 3 a.m., I had a very interesting experience. I was awakened in the middle of the night to sounds of footsteps coming down the hall. At first, I thought it was my wife, only to realize that she was sleeping soundly next to me. Thus, I lay frozen in bed, half awake, as the sound of footsteps came closer and closer to the bedroom. I was scared, and now there is a fairly long and dark hallway that leads out of the main bedroom to reach the living room. What was odd is outside the potential of someone just having broken into my house was that I should have seen whoever it was by now. It was almost as though each step, for sounding like they were getting closer, had no actual physical movement to it. Well, instead of doing anything logical, my sleep-deprived brain could only think to do was to lay there, looking into the darkness of this long black hallway, until whatever had just broken into my house revealed themselves. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped, and I could feel, from my door, my fat-ass cat from the hallway about where the sound stopped looks at me, cries, and proceeds to walk and jump into my bed. I curse and immediately fall back asleep, the footsteps entirely gone. Now, of course, that night, I chalked it up to my rather plump cat, but it wasn't until the next morning that it hits me. I've heard my cat both run and walk through that hallway before, even though we've only been in the house a few days, and there is no way that it could have been him. Even to this day, neither of my 3 cats has been able to repeat the footsteps that night. My dog came back to haunt me. Back in 2019, around February, my dog passed away. I was young and kind of stupid at the time, and I used to ask if there were any spirits or ghosts around me, just messing around. But over time, small things started to happen. My fan would turn on by itself randomly. It was weird, but I brushed it off. Then it got stranger. I started to hear the sound of a dog collar, like the metal tags clinking together, and the footsteps outside my bedroom at night. We'd just gotten a new dog, but since she was a puppy and liked to chew everything, we always kept her in her crate at night. Every time I'd hear the sounds, I'd go out to put her back in, thinking perhaps someone had just let her out. But she was always already in her crate, and the crate wasn't anywhere near my room. It was like 2 rooms over from me. Over time, my room started to feel off. If you've never felt this before, it might sound strange or even stupid, but that energy was heavy. I'd feel super uncomfortable for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Like I needed to leave the room, like I wasn't alone, even when I was. Then came the night that I'll never forget. It was June. I was in my bedroom again, feeling that same discomfort. But I'd gotten used to it at this point. I wasn't on my phone, but I had my TV on. For context, my closet had 2 sliding doors, those panel-style ones, and out of nowhere, the 2 closet doors started slamming against each other. Normally, I would have freaked out and ran away, but this time, I didn't. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anything. I just sat there in this weird trance-like state, staring up at the ceiling. I didn't even look towards the closet. It was almost like I wasn't in control of my own body. And I know it happened because I took a 10-second video of the darkness during it. You can barely hear the clanking in the video, but it's there all right. And what's even weirder is after that, I just went to sleep like nothing had happened. I didn't even get up, didn't run, nothing. It felt like something had taken over and I was just detached. And no, it wasn't the air conditioning or anything like that. I tried recreating that sound. It's physically impossible to make those closet doors slam like that unless you really force them. And even then, that trance feeling, you can't fake that. I've got a couple more stories, but that one sticks with me. It was real, and it was something that I'll never forget. Boomerangs and angel wings. Hello. I live in Poplarville, Mississippi. I've lived here for the last 5 years, and I've always been a type to look up at the sky at night, thanks to my father. Well, until recently, my experience was minimal, and I'd only ever witnessed a few things in my life. Well, that changed a few years ago. I started small seeing just your typical straight line moving object that looked like stars, that had no flashing and a steady movement. Then, about this time last year, I saw something that I had convinced myself was just a flock of birds. Until I saw it again. And I saw more, over a dozen. It started out the night, I believe was the 17th or 18th of March, around 8 p.m. I noticed that I wasn't seeing many more tonight than usual. The sky almost looked like an interstellar highway. It's beautiful. Everywhere I looked, I saw another. Well, about this time I saw it again. A huge crescent-shaped object. It almost looked like a tethered flock of birds. The sky almost looked like it shifted, like with liquid or something. And then I saw another. I ran into the house and asked everyone to hurry outside with me to see what I was seeing. My nephew, who is currently 9 years old, walked out with me and looked up, and immediately saw that there were more lights. Some were higher and some were lower than others. Some seemed to be as low as the clouds and huge, while some lights were as high as the atmosphere, and much, much smaller. We saw so many, it was like a game. When about 10 minutes, in my younger brother, who is 34, walked out with his dog, and about that time, the lowest and biggest light of all flew across, like a giant, silent bird, making absolutely no sound. We all stayed out, watching the sky of what could have arguably been a sci-fi movie. There were tiny lights moving across the sky everywhere, and when I looked, I even saw one stationary, about the atmosphere level, with many smaller lights shooting out all directions and then disappearing. This was the only night I saw this much activity. But every night the sky is clear, I see these things. I finally got a phone good enough to capture a little at night. My latest notable experience was as recent as the 2nd or 3rd of April, when I was out about around 2:30 a.m. on an overcast night. I wasn't expecting to see anything, because it had been raining all day on and off, and before it was still overcast. The clouds were thin and moving quickly with gaps of clear sky. I was looking up, as I always do, when I saw what looked like a giant pair of white wings gliding through the sky in no hurry. The wings looked to either be stark white or almost like an ethereal glow to them, and in the center was absolutely empty. There was nothing to be seen, or at least I absolutely couldn't see anything. My mouth went metallic, and I called my fiancé to hurry out, and he did. About the time that he walked out and looked up, there was a break in the clouds, and at this time, the wings were directly above us. I felt like my eyes couldn't focus on what I was seeing, almost like it was playing tricks on me, and it looked like the wings started moving oddly, instead of being absolutely still and gliding without a flap or sound. They almost looked like they started spinning and flapping wildly as if they were attached to a ball. Then it went back to cloudy above me, and my eyes felt like they were somehow confused for the rest of the night, and I just kept rubbing and rubbing them. I've been out every night since. I have clear skies, and I am always able to see many, if not tens of small moving objects a night, and even my camera cannot pick these up. I know my story sounds fantastical, but if you can lend me the benefit of a doubt, I wanted to share my experience with you. Malicious entity in my bedroom. When I, 22 female, was about 17, I experienced one of the scariest weeks of my life. I grew up terrified of the dark, mostly because my mind would start to see things, shapes, shadows, etc. One night, while in bed, I noticed a dark shadow in a corner where the ceiling and the walls meet. It was so dark and felt very evil. Some time passed, I really don't know how much, but the shadow got darker and felt more sinister as the nights went on. One night, the evil became so overwhelming in its feeling that I slept on my parents' floor as an adult. I feel that. The next couple of days, the evil felt more and more malicious as it progressed to the point that I could not stay in my room for more than a few minutes alone. The evil seemed to fill my entire room. I then couldn't enter the room. Over the course of a week, the evil got stronger and stronger, and I couldn't even go to that side of the house anymore. I was more terrified than I have ever been in my life. On one particular night, I'd been babysitting my little brothers. The house was set up so the kitchen and the living room were connected. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV with my back to the kitchen. All of a sudden, I had the fear that if I looked at the TV, I would suddenly see someone behind me. Then I got the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me, hovering behind me. It was truly the most malicious, evil, and disgusting feeling I've ever felt in my life. I immediately started to have a panic attack. I called my parents in hysterics, and they rushed home. My father informed me that he hadn't blessed the house when they moved in. We went into the room, and my father said a prayer, and the feeling slowly left. I grew up Mormon. I am an atheist/spiritual now, but I'm still not sure what it means. I'm very in tune with paranormal energies, and this experience was by far the most evil I have ever come across in my life. If anyone has any insight, that would be great. Running story. I'm going to start the story by saying that you should always be careful when running, even if it's in a popular place, or even if you have ran a trail a dozen times. It is always important to be aware of your surroundings. When I was in high school, I was a very active runner. I would run every day after school, which allowed me to clear my head, or just to get some clarity on things that I had to decide. I had to run track on and off since middle school, so I could keep up a good pace while running distance, and could even run a pretty decent mile. This story takes place around the time that I was a senior in high school, so there was a lot on my mind. Things like which college I was going to attend, or which colleges could I even get into, etc. Everything was changing pretty fast, and the amount of stress I had from school had finally gotten to me. So, I decided that I would go running in a park after school one day and give myself some time to think. The park was a pretty popular place. It had some really great trails, and it helped that it wasn't far off from my house. So, I ran there pretty often. I always had felt safe while running in the park, as I saw lots of people I knew and often saw someone on the trails. There were some underdeveloped areas you could run for some good scenic views, where you could sometimes see deer and other animals. When I had gotten to the park, there were people there, but it wasn't as busy as usual, which didn't bother me, as I had a lot on my mind and needed some time to run and just think. I did all of the things I usually did, like stretch, got ready to enter the woods. I put my headphones in, and the second I did, I blurred everything else out. I'd started up my run with a nice light jog, and then passed some people and smiled like normal, until there was a man who greeted me with a smile that was extremely unsettling. If I had to describe it, I would say, imagine someone is looking down and they smile with no teeth while bringing their eyes up like in a movie. Sounds creepy. It was creepy, but I nodded and waved like I normally would to anyone. I tried not to pay too much attention to the man, and kept running as I was at a public park, and it wasn't unusual, of course, to see other people. I'd maybe ran a few laps around the common park area, and kept passing the man in the same area, which struck me as weird, as I had ran laps before, and not little ones either. I'm talking like laps that took 5 to 8 minutes sometimes. Every time I would pass, I would politely nod to him and keep running. After a while, though, I started to think more and more about the situation. I began wondering why the man hadn't moved much from the original area that I had seen him in. At this point, I started seeing less and less people on the main trails as it became later in the afternoon. The sun was covering in the clouds, although it hadn't quite set. It was getting darker and gloomy, as if a storm were coming in the distance. It was late April, so it was hot and rainy pretty frequently, and I decided that I would run a little bit longer until it started to rain. Then I decided I would head back to my car. I ran past the main parking lot and noticed that my car was the only car parked in the lot. So I knew I was alone and figured everyone knew that the rain was coming and decided to leave. I ran towards the entrance, re-entered the running path, passing the original place that I'd seen the man, and to my relief he was gone. I slowed down, catching my breath, and walked slightly for a few minutes, deeper and deeper into the trail. I was gathering my thoughts when I felt the feeling of being watched. I took my headphones out, and when I did, the park was silent. Scary silent. You could hear the trees blowing in the wind or the cars on the main road. You could only hear the sound of my breath and the music that was blasting from my headphones. I looked around. I didn't notice anything, so I kept walking, this time remaining vigilant, as I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I was walking, I had my head down, and when I brought it up, I noticed the man from earlier was walking in a direction, except this time he wasn't smiling. He looked agitated, so I didn't bother to smile or even wave at him. I kept my head down, but I noticed he was in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved t-shirt. Something I hadn't noticed earlier. It wasn't unusual for someone to be wearing that, of course, but it was in the low 80s and humid from the rainy days prior, so I knew he had to be hot with what he was wearing. I kept walking for a minute, hoping that I was in the clear, and when I made it probably 20 feet away, I turned around to see where he'd went, and to my surprise, he turned around also, walking in my direction. I picked up my pace a little and started jogging, leaving my headphones out this time. Every step I took, I heard more behind me. I glanced back and noticed the man jogging as well. I thought to myself, jogging in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved shirt? I was so deep into the trail that I thought it was equidistant to both the start and finish, and that if I kept going, I would loop around to my car without having to turn around. But every step took me deeper and deeper into the woods, further and further away from the main road. And though it seems dumb, I knew I could not run past a man if he was planning on doing something, and I didn't want to find out. I had close to a mile left on the trail, but every time I would pick up the pace, so would the man. I kept hoping that he would stop, perhaps to take a breath, but he never did. I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't, especially since every time I picked up the pace, he was quick to increase his pace as well. The area was much darker now, and the rain had started pouring down. I was now drenched. As I took a look back, the man was even closer than before. He was gaining on me, and I knew that I had to make a fast decision. And so I went for it in hopes that if he was following me, he wouldn't calculate my next move. I was approaching a scenic dip-off trail that had been overgrown and covered by leaves and sticks leading downward on a slope like a tall hill. People had stopped running down it because of how steep it was, but it cut right down the main loop, saving probably 1/3 of the remainder. At this point, the only people who really knew about it were the people who had ran it before it had become overgrown. I picked up my pace, as fast as I could, running straight forward on the main path, and covered my face with my arms, cutting a sharp left running through the twigs, vines, and leaves. I heard an audible gasp, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I ran down the hill as fast as I could, hoping that I'd made the right decision, too afraid to even look back until I reached the bottom of the hill. I'd put a good distance between us, and when I turned around for the last time, there he was, standing at the top of the hill, looking down at me, breathing heavily, looking annoyed and angry like he was on the verge of a psychotic break. He was breathing heavily, covered in rain, and just staring at me with such anger in his eyes. I didn't stick around and ran as fast as I could towards my car, hoping that when I got to my car, the story would end there. This is terrifying, but when I approached my car, I quickly jumped into it, pulling out of the parking lot as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, noticing the man on the edge of the woods, staring, and it immediately sent chills down my spine, as there were no other cars in the parking lot. It had just been me and him. I was shaking the whole car ride home, and I was too afraid to tell my parents, because if they knew, I knew they wouldn't let me run again, and that was my only form of solitude. I laid in bed all night in fear, thinking about his unsettling smile and how creepy he was overall. I thought about how I should have known something was wrong sooner and felt bad for it. I finally fell asleep after replaying all of the scenarios in my head, and was woken up at 3 a.m. by my stepdad who had just gotten home from work. I heard him enter the house in a panic, screaming for me. When I sat up, he came into my room asking if I was okay. And when I asked, he pointed outside. I quickly went outside to see my car door open, and my car had been gone through. Seats were slashed, and there was a busted back window. I was confused as nothing had been stolen, but just to destroy my car with such anger was strange. I started to think about who would do something that terrible and why. We lived in a secluded area with only 2 neighbors, which lived far away from us to allow us to be loud and to have gatherings, but close enough to run to in case of an emergency. So nobody had heard anything. Aside from the glass and the cut seats, the only thing sitting on my seat was my registration. It suddenly dawned on me that when I ran to my car earlier that day, I had jumped straight in and took off. I didn't unlock my car. It was older, so it had to be manually locked and unlocked with a key. But I didn't unlock it. I knew it had to be the man from earlier. He must have looked at the registration, gotten my name and address from it. I moved to college shortly after this, and my family sold the house when I was in college, but it still makes me wonder what else he would have done if he'd gotten to me, or worse, broken into my house. Did the ghost miss me? One night, I went to go house sit while my mum was away, and this had been the first time in a couple of years that I'd been there. Lots of paranormal stuff would happen, and I even had a spirit attached to me before this. But the first night there, I had a dream that someone had been knocking at the door of the bedroom I was in, and so I said, "Come in." It was a family member asking to use my phone and saying dinner was ready. I told him yes and that I'd be right out. He then left, and a couple of seconds later, I heard knocking again, and again I said, "Come in." Again, the knocking and my reply, over and over, until I realized the knocking was coming from under my bed. Then, this demonic-looking hand came out and a voice saying, Levy, we've been waiting for you to come back for a while now. Was it just a bad dream? Or was it the old spirit that used to bother me when I lived there? I think something was in my house when I was younger. This is a story I haven't told anyone, except for my family, but I'm telling it here as it's been bothering me for years. When I was a kid, my family home was divided into 3. One for my uncle and 2 for his children, another for my mother and me, and a third, which stood empty after my great-grandfather had died. It was a large, ugly house that had been targeted by burglars before. And I bet this is a UK story. And the first time was before I was born. The second time I was 5 and slept through it. Another time, someone was walking around our garden and rearranging things. Or every day around 3 or 4 a.m. they were standing in the front of our fence, looking into windows. When I was 7 years old, things calmed down a bit activity-wise. The neighbour in question went away, and with him many of these types of incidents disappeared. But I remembered it was a big event, because my family finally allowed themselves to have animals, as the neighbour was attacking other people's animals. We got 3 cats and a dog from the shelter. The other neighbours became calmer too. But I still felt an uncomfortable feeling in the house. I was a nervous and fearful child. After all these stories, I still don't like being left alone in the dark at home. So there was an unspoken agreement that if my uncle or cousins were leaving the house for a moment, they couldn't tell me, so I didn't have to be afraid. Unfortunately, my cousin, then 23, came to see how I was doing one day. We chatted for a while, and then she told me she was going to the shop. Of course, I panicked. I didn't want to go with her, but I didn't want to stay alone at the house either, so I started crying. It ended with my cousin letting me go to her room so we could watch cartoons, which was a pretty big deal, because she was the only one who had so many channels on her TV. Her room was on the ground floor, and had a window onto the neighbour's garden, who had a barbecue at the time. I remember she used that as another argument. If anything happens, open the window and shout to them. And she then left, and I focused on the cartoons. I remember I had already watched an entire episode of Dexter's Laboratory, great choice, and had switched to the channel that had the Barbie movie on when I heard some sounds. At first, I assumed it was one of our pets, but the next sounds were more like footsteps and doors opening. My cousin came back from the shop, but I didn't even finish watching the Barbie movie. I remember being more angry than scared at that point, and deciding to be quiet, so maybe it would take her a while before she threw me out of her room. But the noise was really annoying. Lots of loud footsteps shuffling, and some barking from our dog. At one point, the sounds were close to the room. My cousins had a door with a window back then. It was one of those where you can barely see anything and only see the shadows. So when I turned around, all I saw was a dark figure in a grey and black outfit. Nothing special, no bright colours. It was hard to tell if it was even a man or a woman. So I once again assumed it must be my cousin and decided to stay quiet, hoping she wouldn't come in. But even as I was starting to feel uncomfortable, because this figure was standing there and doing nothing in front of a door, finally the person turned right into the kitchen, and I went back to watching cartoons. Only shortly after, what everyone probably expected to happen, I heard our front door open and a loud, "I'm back," from my cousin. This time, I also heard the sound of plastic bags rustling. I remember being suddenly completely terrified, but before I did anything, my cousin went to the kitchen and nothing happened. No screaming, no fighting. I literally sat in her room, now with the cartoon sound turned completely off, listening intently. But it all sounded like normal, just the unpacking of groceries. And then my cousin came over and I started crying. I ended up telling her what had happened, and she called the neighbors. Together they searched the entire house, but they found no one. Nothing looked damaged, and in the next days, nothing disappeared from our house. The rest of the family found out too. We confirmed that my uncle and mother were at work, and my second cousin was at school. The day this experience happened, we found our cats sleeping in my great-grandfather's apartment on the second floor, but the dog was nervous and spent the entire time searching around the neighbors and whining. We never managed to solve it, but when I spoke with my cousin recently, she admitted that she spoke to my uncle about it years after the event, and together they came to the conclusion that I must have imagined something. But I am 100% certain of what I saw that day.